What would you do if the person you looked down on turned out to hold your entire future in their hands? One waitress's cruel actions come back to haunt her in ways she never expected, and the lesson she learns will leave you speechless. Stay tuned to see how one moment of kindness, or the lack of it, can change everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an unforgettable story from Life Story. Let's dive in. In the bustling heart of Larksville, nestled between towering office buildings and modest storefronts, stood a small diner known simply as Victor's Place. It was a cozy establishment with red leather booths, the smell of frying bacon, and a perpetual hum of chatter from loyal customers. At the center of it all was Delilah Montrose, known to most as Lila. Lila had the kind of charm that could disarm you, but only if you were on her good side. Her dazzling smile and sharp wit made her a favorite of regulars who tipped generously. But for those she deemed beneath her, be it the young, the struggling, or simply those who didn't fit her mold of worthwhile, her charm quickly turned to thinly veiled disdain. It was a busy lunch hour, the kind of afternoon where every table was filled, the kitchen was running at full throttle, and Lila thrived in the chaos. As she flitted from table to table, balancing trays and dishing out polite laughs to favored customers, the diner's bell jingled. A soft-spoken woman in simple worn clothes stepped inside. Her name was Ariel Tate. She moved with quiet grace, her eyes scanning the room as if unsure of her place among the busy diners. Clutching a small handbag that seemed frayed at the edges, she approached the counter and offered a gentle smile. "Excuse me," Ariel began, her voice barely rising above the clatter of dishes. "May I sit here?" Lila glanced up from the register, taking in Ariel's modest appearance. Her painted nails drummed against the countertop as her lips curled into a smirk. "Sure," she said, her tone dismissive, "but we don't do charity meals here." Ariel's smile faltered, but she remained calm. She slid into a stool at the counter and picked up the laminated menu. Around her, the noise of the diner carried on, but a few customers glanced her way, sensing the tension in the air. After a moment, Ariel spoke again, this time with an apologetic tone. "I'd like the house special, please." "Aye." She hesitated, lowering her gaze. "I seem to have misplaced my wallet, but I promise I can pay you back tomorrow. I'll even leave a tip." Lila's eyebrows shot up and a scoff escaped her lips. "Let me get this straight. You want a meal, no money, and you'll pay later?" Her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of nearby tables. Ariel looked up, her cheeks flushed but her posture steady. "I understand if that's against your policy," she said gently. "I was only asking." Before she could finish, Lila grabbed a plate with half-eaten food left by another customer. With a flourish, she set it down in front of Ariel with a loud clink. "Here you go. On the house," Lila said, her voice dripping with mock kindness. Then, as if to make her point crystal clear, she leaned closer. "And don't bother coming back until you can afford to pay like everyone else." Gasps rippled through the diner. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Lila and Ariel, but no one said a word. Ariel, for her part, didn't argue. She looked at the plate, then back at Lila, her face unreadable. Slowly, she rose from her seat. "Thank you for your kindness," Ariel said softly. Her words carried no sarcasm, only a quiet dignity that seemed to linger in the air long after she turned and walked out the door. Unbeknownst to Lila, a man seated near the window had been watching everything. Dressed in a crisp suit with silver hair that shone under the diner's fluorescent lights, he folded his newspaper and stood. This was Martin Kane, Ariel's chauffeur and confidant. Without a word, he left the diner, his expression grim. As the door swung shut behind them, Lila returned to her duties, oblivious to the ripple effect of her actions. Customers whispered among themselves, their glances heavy with disapproval. But like so many moments of injustice, the murmurs quickly faded, and the routine of the diner resumed. Lila Montrose had always been quick to judge. Born and raised in Larksville, she'd spent most of her life yearning for something bigger. She dreamed of glittering cities, high-rise apartments, and a life far removed from the grease-stained floors of Victor's Place. But dreams, as Lila saw them, were like lottery tickets, rarely won by people like her. And so she buried her frustrations behind a veneer of superiority, directing her bitterness at those who crossed her path. At home, her boyfriend Ronan Kessler often tried to soften her sharp edges. Ronan was a kind-hearted mechanic who believed in treating everyone with respect, no matter their circumstances. "You don't have to be so hard on people, Lila," he'd say, his hands streaked with oil as he worked on another customer's car. "The world's tough enough without folks tearing each other down." But Lila would only shrug, rolling her eyes as if kindness were a luxury she couldn't afford. "What do you know about it, Ronan?" she'd retort. "Being nice doesn't pay the bills." Ronan would shake his head, a mix of disappointment and resignation in his eyes. He loved Lila, but he couldn't help but wonder if the bitterness in her heart would one day cost her more than she realized. Back at the diner, the aftermath of Ariel's quiet exit lingered. Lila noticed the tension but brushed it off, choosing to see herself as the victor in an unspoken battle. Little did she know, the wheels of karma had already begun to turn. Outside the diner, Ariel and Martin stood by a sleek black car, their conversation barely audible over the hum of traffic. "She was cruel," Martin said, his voice laced with anger. Ariel placed a hand on his arm, her expression calm yet resolute. "She needs to learn," she said simply, "and she will." The days that followed Ariel's quiet exit were uneventful for Lila. She carried on as usual, juggling orders, flashing smiles at her favorite regulars, and delivering her signature barbs to anyone she deemed undeserving of her time. If guilt gnawed at her for how she'd treated Ariel, it was buried so deep she scarcely noticed it. But things were about to change. One afternoon, as the lunch rush tapered off and the diner quieted, the sound of a throat clearing drew everyone's attention. Behind the counter stood Victor DeLance, the diner's owner, a gruff but fair man who rarely interfered with the day-to-day chaos of his establishment. His stern demeanor softened only when he spoke about his dream, to expand Victor's place into a regional chain, a legacy for his family. Victor clapped his hands together, commanding the room. "Listen up, folks," he said, his deep voice carrying across the diner. "I've got big news." The staff paused mid-clean, turning their attention to him. Even Lila, busy wiping down a table, looked up with mild curiosity. Victor continued, "Next week, we've got a VIP investor stopping by. This isn't just any investor. They're considering putting big money into expanding Victor's place. This is a chance to prove we're more than just a little diner in Larksville. So I want everything perfect. That means spotless counters, polished floors, and," he shot a pointed look at the staff, "exceptional customer service." A murmur rippled through the room. Some staff exchanged nervous glances while others whispered excitedly about the possibilities. Lila, however, merely smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Relax, Vic," she said, her tone flippant. "I've got charm for days. Whoever this VIP is, they'll be eating out of my hand." Victor didn't laugh. "This is serious. Lila, I expect everyone to be on their best behavior. No exceptions." Lila waved him off, turning her attention back to the table she was cleaning. "Sure thing, boss." What Lila didn't know, what no one knew, was the identity of this VIP. It wasn't some faceless corporate investor or a stiff banker in a suit. It was Ariel Tate, the same woman Lila had humiliated just days before. And Ariel wasn't just an investor. She was the CEO and founder of the Tate Culinary Group, a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire that spanned cities across the country. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Staff scrubbed every inch of the diner, Victor oversaw menu revisions, and even Lila, though dismissive of the VIP's importance, made an effort to tidy her station. On the appointed day, the diner gleamed under the midday sun. The staff bustled with nervous energy, and Victor paced near the entrance, adjusting his tie every few minutes. Lila, as usual, leaned casually against the counter, chewing gum and feigning indifference. The bell above the door jingled, and the diner fell silent. In walked Ariel Tate, flanked by her assistant, Jonas Quill, and her chauffeur, Martin Kane. Gone were the simple clothes and quiet demeanor. Ariel now wore a sleek, tailored pantsuit that exuded confidence, her hair neatly styled, and her presence commanding attention. Lila froze, the gum in her mouth nearly falling out. Recognition hit her like a freight train. This was no ordinary customer. This was the same woman she had mocked and humiliated. Ariel's eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting Lila's before moving on as if she were just another piece of the diner's furniture. Jonas stepped forward, his clipboard in hand, and introduced himself. "Miss Tate is here to evaluate the diner," Jonas announced, his tone professional but firm. "We'll be observing the staff, the service, and of course the food." Victor greeted them warmly, his voice tinged with nervousness. "Miss Tate, welcome to Victor's place. It's an honor to have you here." Ariel offered a polite nod. "Thank you, Mr. DeLance. I've heard a lot about your diner. I'm looking forward to the experience." Her gaze flicked to Lila, who was now standing rigid behind the counter, her confident demeanor replaced by a poorly masked mix of shock and dread. Jonas spoke again, glancing at his clipboard. "Miss Tate has requested to sit at the counter for a closer look at service dynamics, and she specifically requested." His eyes landed on Lila, Ms. Montrose to be her server. The room seemed to shrink around Lila. For a moment, she considered protesting, claiming she was too busy or that another server would be better suited. But one look from Victor silenced her objections. "Of course," Victor said quickly, his smile strained. "Lila will take excellent care of you." Ariel slid onto a stool at the counter, her expression calm, almost unreadable. Martin and Jonas took seats at a nearby booth, leaving Ariel to face Lila directly. Lila approached hesitantly, her mind racing. Should she apologize? Pretend not to remember? She settled on a brittle smile, trying to recapture her usual charm. "Welcome to Victor's place," she said, her voice slightly strained. "What can I get for you today?" Ariel studied her for a moment, her gaze steady but not unkind. "I'll start with a coffee," she said simply. "Black." Lila nodded quickly. "Coming right up." As she turned to pour the coffee, her hands trembled slightly. She could feel Ariel's eyes on her, not with malice, but with a quiet authority that unnerved her. Returning with the coffee, Lila placed it on the counter and forced another smile. "Anything else?" Ariel took a sip, then set the cup down with deliberate precision. "Not for now. I'd like to take my time. I'm sure you'll take excellent care of me, Leela." Her use of Lila's name felt deliberate, a subtle reminder that Ariel hadn't forgotten their previous encounter. Lila swallowed hard, her mind swirling with regret and apprehension. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning the choices that had brought her here. And as Ariel continued to sip her coffee, her composure unshaken, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The day had turned into a slow-moving nightmare for Lila. Ariel's quiet but commanding presence threw her off balance, and the heat of the spotlight felt suffocating. As the minutes dragged on, Ariel leaned forward, her demeanor casual but her words deliberate. "Tell me, Lila," she began, tapping a manicured nail against her coffee cup, "what's your favorite item on the menu? I always find it fascinating to hear what the staff recommends." Lila blinked, caught off guard by the question. The burger's decent," she said flatly, "if you're into that." Ariel tilted her head, her smile soft but questioning. "Just decent? You don't sound very enthusiastic. Do you enjoy working here?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment Lila considered offering a polite, rehearsed response. But her irritation got the better of her. "It's fine," she replied curtly, barely masking the edge in her tone. "It's a job." Ariel nodded thoughtfully, as if Lila's lackluster response had confirmed something. "A job is important, no doubt," she said. "But don't you think passion makes all the difference? Customers can sense it when someone really cares about what they do." Lila forced a tight smile, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Guess I'll keep that in mind." From his seat at the booth, Jonas discreetly adjusted his pen, the tiny camera embedded within its frame capturing every moment. His expression remained neutral, but his notes were anything but. As the afternoon wore on, Ariel continued her subtle prodding. She asked about the diner's history, its busiest hours, and even the origin of the quirky names on the menu. Lila answered with the bare minimum, her responses clipped and devoid of enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Ariel's interactions with the other staff were markedly different. When young Lucy, the dishwasher, emerged from the kitchen to clear a table, Ariel complimented her efficiency. "You're doing a wonderful job, Lucy. I can tell you take pride in your work." Lucy beamed, her cheeks turning pink. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." Ariel turned to Victor at one point, asking about his vision for the diner's future. "I've always wanted to keep the heart of this place intact," Victor said earnestly. but I'd love to see it grow. Maybe add a location or two, spread the charm of Victor's place. You've built something special here, Ariel replied warmly. It's clear you care deeply about your customers and your staff. Victor nodded, his chest puffing with pride. He didn't notice the way Lila scowled, her arms crossed tightly as she leaned against the counter. By mid-afternoon, the diner was bustling again, the lunch crowd trickling back in for coffee and pie. Lila's patience, already frayed, began to snap. When Ariel requested a second cup of coffee, Lila sighed audibly. "Sure, I'll get that," she muttered, barely concealing her annoyance. Ariel raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting the moment pass. As Lila placed the fresh cup in front of her, she accidentally sloshed some onto the saucer. Ariel glanced at it but didn't comment. Lila, however, muttered under her breath, "Should have poured it myself if you're so picky." Ariel looked up, her calm expression unwavering. "What was that?" she asked, her tone as light as a feather but cutting all the same. "Nothing," Lila said quickly, avoiding her gaze. By the end of Ariel's visit, the tension in the air was palpable. The other staff had taken note of Lila's attitude, whispering among themselves. But no one dared intervene. Just as Ariel prepared to leave, Victor approached the counter, his face flushed with excitement. He cleared his throat, calling for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'd like to officially introduce Ms. Ariel Tate. She's not just here as a customer, she's here as a prospective buyer for Victor's place." Gasps rippled through the diner, and all eyes turned to Ariel, who stood gracefully, offering a modest smile. Lila's stomach dropped. Her face went pale, and she gripped the counter for support. This couldn't be happening. Victor continued, "Miss Tate is considering investing in the future of this diner, but before she makes her decision, she's proposed an evaluation period. For the next week, she'll be observing how we run things, how we serve, how we treat customers, everything." Lila felt the room spinning. She could barely hear Victor's words over the roaring in her ears. A week. She would have to endure Ariel's watchful eyes for an entire week. Ariel stepped forward, her voice soft yet commanding. "I believe in making decisions based on first-hand experience. So for the next 7 days, I'll be here, getting to know the staff, the customers, and the heart of Victor's place." She turned her gaze to Lila, holding it for a beat longer than necessary. "I'm sure it will be enlightening." The staff broke into nervous chatter as Ariel exited with Jonas and Martin. Victor clapped his hands, calling for everyone's attention again. "This is it, folks. Our chance to prove what Victor's place is all about. Let's make it count." But as the others buzzed with a mix of excitement and apprehension, Lila remained frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the next week would be a test, not just for the diner, but for her. And deep down, she feared she was about to fail. The days following Ariel's announcement were a whirlwind for the staff, but none felt the pressure more than Lila. Determined to avoid further scrutiny, she forced herself into a brittle semblance of politeness. Her interactions with customers were stiff, her smiles shallow, and her patience razor-thin. For a while, it worked. Ariel, ever watchful, observed her from a distance, making notes but rarely commenting. Jonas continued his quiet documentation, his hidden camera catching every interaction. Lila hated the constant surveillance, but the fear of losing her job kept her in line, for the most part. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon, with the diner unusually quiet, that the cracks in Lila's facade began to show. A frail, elderly man shuffled in, his clothes damp and his hands trembling. His voice was soft, almost apologetic, as he asked for a cup of coffee. Lila, wiping down the counter, glanced at him with disdain. "We don't do charity here," she snapped, her voice loud enough for the few diners present to hear. The man looked startled, his gaze dropping to the floor. I can pay," he stammered, pulling out a handful of coins. Lila rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Wow, a whole $1. That'll barely cover the napkin." The diner went silent. All eyes were on Lila, including Ariel's, who sat in her usual booth near the window. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Victor emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone firm. Lila folded her arms, her annoyance evident. "Nothing. Just dealing with another freeloader." Before Victor could respond, Ariel stood, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. She approached the counter, her posture elegant but commanding. "Lila," she said evenly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" In the privacy of the back office, Ariel closed the door gently before turning to face Lila. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. Lila blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know what you mean." Ariel's lips curved into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Let me remind you, I was the freeloader you threw a sandwich at. I didn't retaliate then because I wanted to see who you really were, and now I've seen enough." Lila's face drained of color. "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Ariel interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You judged me, humiliated me, and dismissed me. And today, you've done the same to someone else." Lila opened her mouth to protest, but the door creaked open. Jonas stepped in, holding a tablet. "I think Victor should see this," he said, glancing at Ariel. With a nod, Ariel gestured for Jonas to proceed. On the screen was a montage of Lila's worst moments, the snide remarks, the eye rolls, the outright cruelty. Victor's face darkened as he watched, his disappointment palpable. When the video ended, the room was silent. Victor sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Lila," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've tried to give you chances. I've defended you to customers, to the staff. But this is unacceptable." Before Victor could deliver what Lila assumed was her termination, Ariel spoke up. "Wait, I have an idea." Victor looked at her, surprised. "You want to give her another chance?" "Not a chance," Ariel corrected. "An ultimatum." She turned to Lila, her gaze piercing. "You can walk out of here right now and this chapter of your life will be over. Or you can spend the next month under my mentorship, learning what it means to treat people with dignity and respect. But be warned, it won't be easy." Lila stared at her, disbelief etched across her face. "Mentorship? You mean like working for you?" Ariel's smile returned, this time with a hint of amusement. "Not for me, with me. You'll attend empathy training sessions, volunteer at shelters, and learn the value of kindness. If you succeed, you'll have a fresh start. If you fail, you're done." Lila hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She glanced at Victor, whose expression was stern but hopeful. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." The following week was a humbling experience for Lila. Her first assignment was to shadow Ariel at a nearby community kitchen. The bustling environment was overwhelming, and Lila struggled to keep up with the fast-paced demands. "Excuse me, miss," an elderly woman said gently, holding out her tray. "Could I have a little more soup?" Lila hesitated, her instinct to snap held in check by Ariel's watchful presence. "Of course," she replied stiffly, ladling another scoop into the woman's bowl. Ariel leaned in, her voice low. "Try adding a smile next time. It makes a world of difference." Lila gritted her teeth but nodded. Back at the diner, the staff was less forgiving. Lucy, the dishwasher, snickered as Lila struggled to carry a tray of dishes. "Not so high and mighty now, huh?" she quipped. Lila bit back a retort, focusing instead on balancing the tray. She knew every mistake would be reported back to Ariel. By the end of the first week, Lila was exhausted, her body aching and her pride bruised. But something had shifted. The acts of kindness she was forced to perform, though initially begrudging, began to feel less burdensome. She found herself listening more, snapping less, and even, on rare occasions, smiling. As the month wore on, Lila started to see the world through a different lens. At the community kitchen, she met people with stories of resilience and hope. At the empathy training sessions, she learned techniques for managing her temper and practicing gratitude. Ariel remained a constant presence, guiding her with patience and firmness. "Growth isn't easy," she told Lila one day, "but it's worth it, you'll see." And slowly, Lila did. The transformation wasn't sudden, nor was it easy. For weeks, Lila battled her pride, confronted the ugliness of her past actions, and struggled to adapt to a new way of seeing the world. But little by little, the lessons began to take root. At the community kitchen, Lila found herself lingering to hear the stories of the people she served. One elderly woman, frail but spirited, told her of losing everything in a fire, but finding joy in the simple kindness of strangers. A young man shared how he had once been a thriving entrepreneur before a medical crisis drained his savings and left him homeless. For the first time, Lila truly listened, not with impatience but with genuine curiosity. These weren't just faces passing through her day, they were lives, full of struggles and triumphs, joys and sorrows. One drizzly afternoon, Lila spotted a familiar figure shuffling toward the diner. It was the homeless man she had insulted weeks before. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, his steps slow and weary. Lila's chest tightened as she stepped outside, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of food. "Excuse me," she called softly. The man turned, his eyes wary but curious. "I owe you an apology," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. "The way I treated you that day, it was wrong. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." For a moment, the man said nothing, his gaze searching her face. Then a small smile crept onto his lips. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice kind. "That means more than you know." Lila gestured toward the table outside the diner. "Please sit. Let me get you something warm to eat." As the man ate, he shared snippets of his life, a once thriving construction worker whose injuries left him unable to work. Lila listened intently, her heart aching with a mix of regret and newfound empathy. When the month ended, Ariel gathered the staff for a meeting. Standing at the head of the room, she smiled warmly. "I've made my decision," she began. "I'll be purchasing the diner. But this won't just be a business venture, it'll be a community space, a place where everyone feels welcome." The staff erupted into applause, but Lila sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew her future still hung in the balance. Ariel turned to Lila, her expression thoughtful. "Lila, you've come a long way, but the real question is, what do you want from here on out?" Lila stood, her voice steady but earnest. "I want to do better, to be better. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay and keep learning." Ariel nodded, a proud smile on her face. "Then welcome to the team as assistant manager." The room buzzed with whispers of surprise, but Lila felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just being forgiven, she was being trusted, and she wouldn't take it lightly. The diner underwent a transformation. Ariel renamed it Tate's Haven, with warm, inviting decor that reflected its new mission. Community events were hosted weekly, from charity fundraisers to free meals for those in need. Lila threw herself into her new role, organizing events, managing the staff, and making sure every customer felt valued. It wasn't always easy. Old habits crept in now and then, but she caught herself quicker each time. Months later, on a bustling Saturday morning, the diner was alive with energy. Families laughed over pancakes, students huddled over textbooks, and regulars greeted the staff like old friends. Lila moved through the room with ease, balancing trays and stopping to chat with customers. At one table sat the homeless man, now a regular. Lila delivered his coffee with a smile. "How's it going, Mr. Carter?" He chuckled, tipping his hat. "Better than ever, thanks to this place." Ariel watched from her corner booth, her heart swelling with pride. She had taken a chance on the diner, on its staff, and on Lila, and it had paid off. As the lunch rush began, Lila stepped outside to flip the open sign. She paused, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. For the first time in years, she felt peace, not because her circumstances had changed, but because she had. Smiling to herself, she turned back to the bustling diner, ready to embrace whatever came next. Tate's Haven was more than a diner now. It was a home, a refuge, and a testament to the power of change. And Lila was proud to be a part of it.